Okay, for our next exercise, we are going to do what's called a shape composition. Especially in graphic arts, the silhouette shape of things is far more important than the detail, or even the color. So how do we start the shape composition? We first do just an image search for images we like. And this could be by a favorite artist, or a favorite genre of painting, or drawing. But it should be two-dimensional. And one of my favorite artists is James Jean, who started out as an illustrator like I am, doing covers for comic books. And now he does a lot of fine artwork and paintings. And if you want to see a really good website that shows a lot of process, if you check out his website and then look at his blog, he's actually updated his website since I last looked at it. You can just see a lot of interesting progression of work that uses digital, that uses traditional media, and he shows his sketchbooks as well, which are always very inspiring. Okay, so the piece that I like by him is this one. And what I like about it, there's a lot of pieces I like, but if I squint and really reduce this image to just its shapes, it's still very interesting. It doesn't rely on all the intricate detail to be a compelling image to me. And one way you can test that is once you save the file to your desktop, and I have it here, you're going to open it with Photoshop. And this is a way of just testing to see if its composition is something you're interested in doing. And you want to be interested in it because we're going to be using the shape tools within Photoshop to create that composition. So this is how we'll test it. First, it opens up, doesn't matter what resolution it is, doesn't matter what size it is. So this image is 4 by 5 inches by 600 pixels per inch. So it's actually quite big, but it doesn't need to be, because we're just using it to draw inspiration from. I'm going to make a quick duplicate of it with Command J. So I have 2 layers of it. Then I'm going to go up to Filter, and I'm going to blur it, Gaussian blur. And I'm going to blur it so much that I just see the shapes, not the detail. So that's very different than this, right? But if it's still something you're interested in, then then you've picked a good piece. And now if I want to sharpen that blur, I'll make another duplicate just so you can see the process. I go up to Filter, and I go to Sharpen, and I'm going to use Smart Sharpen, which is like the opposite of Gaussian blur. But because we've already taken the information away, now the computer has to try to get it back. But the computer cannot make up information. Right? So even if I push all the settings all the way and it sharpens, what it's going to do is sharpen kind of the big blurry shapes into clearer big shapes. And that's basically what we'll be doing using the shape tools in Photoshop. Okay, so there's a big difference between this. It's a little too sharpened actually. And the blurriness of that and the original. Right? So Photoshop does not do a good job making up information. It can only manipulate the information you give it. But somewhere in between these two, that's about what I want from my shape composition. This eerie, strange, pink bubble alien looking thing. All right, so how do we set this up and how do we do it? First thing we're going to do is we have to make it print worthy. So whatever size your file is, you're going to go up to image size, and you're going to resample the image. Lock its proportions and resample the image. So have resample checked and have the lock between width and height. And no matter what size it was originally, it had a certain pixel dimension and a certain amount of memory that it took up. We are going to make it at least 10 inches wide and whatever height comes along with it. Right. And its resolution, we are going to make 350 pixels per inch. So at least 10 inches wide and 350 pixels per inch. For my image, that gives me 3,500 pixels by 5,049 pixels. It was before only 23 megabytes, and now it's 50 megabytes, more than double. So I'm asking the computer to make up information, which is going to soften the pixels a little bit, which does not make it a good image for printing, because 350 is going to be our lab's print resolution. So everything's a little bit softer than it was before. But when we're finished with this project, we're not going to see anything that we didn't create ourselves. We're only going to see the shapes we create. So what we've done is we've created a canvas that's high enough resolution for us to print.
What size again?
10 inches wide by 350 pixels. All right, now I'm going to go on top of my top layer. I'm going to click my top layer. And I'm going to go all the way down to the shape tools. And the most basic shape tool is what's called the rectangle tool. And before I use it, I'm going to click on the colors, the foreground colors and the background colors, and I'm going to click on the defaults. And the default should be black on white. Okay? Just so you get a sense for what these tools do. So there's not a lot of rectangles in this piece. This piece is very organic. So instead of using the rectangle tool, I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to move down to the ellipse tool, which gives me circles and ovals. And just like we did basic shapes before by drawing, we're going to do basic shapes now by doing big cutouts. So I'm going to draw a big oval, and I can move it around, whoops, once I've drawn it with the move tool. And think of this as cutting out pieces of paper. And it will open up what's called the shape properties, but more importantly, it creates an automatic layer for me. And these are how the vector tools work in Photoshop. So what I did is I just made a perfectly cut out oval that's perfectly smooth on top of my artwork. The problem is it's very much the wrong color. So how do I change the color? Well, within the shape details here, I can click on the color and I can select another color from the swatches, but these are very limited. I could do the color picker here and use all the millions of colors, but it's really hard to select the color that way. So whenever you have a color selector, you also have the ability to use the magic dropper and to select the color that way and add a color to your swatches. And so I want to pick my color directly from the painting itself. So the way to do that is to just double click on your shape and then use the color selector to change the color of your shape. Right, so that's one, but the problem is it's not quite the right shape, right? It needs to taper at the bottom. So once you've made your original shape with the shape tool, then you can do what we learned with the cartoon jumble. You can transform it. So if I do Command T, I can get to free transform. I can shrink it, I can rotate it, I can do all those different things. I can also right click and warp it. and kind of customize the shape a little bit. And so it's just like having colored paper and doing cutouts with colored paper, except that you can also add to the paper. You know, it's like you have tape and glue, and you'll have seamless modifications to your cutouts. And the only rule is you have to use the shape tools, and you can only fill them with solid colors. And you're going to try to make the composition work. Okay, the next shape I might want is this outside kind of bluish shape. And I might build that with a few shapes. So I'll do another oval. I don't need to worry about making a new layer. It will make an automatic new layer. And I'm going to change the color by double clicking on it and then picking a color from the painting itself. And then I'm going to warp it using Command T and warp. Kind of make it into what I want. No problem. Hit return. And I'm going to drop that shape now behind my other shape. I can use the move tool to kind of position it, and then free transform again with Command T. So we'll get really good at these transformations, at these manipulations. And instead of doing it to images that we found online, like we did in the cartoon jumble, we're doing it with shapes that we create within Photoshop. And because they're made with the shape tool, these shapes are perfectly smooth vectors that are scalable. So as I make them bigger, they are not losing resolution. They will always be really, really clean, like they were cut out with an X-Acto knife. And it definitely takes some practice and getting used to. Like I do these little things at the top. I draw them, I'll rotate them, I'll place them, hit return, move them behind the other layers, just like you would with cutouts of paper. And then move on to the next shape I want to create. And if your tools aren't working the way that I'm demonstrating here, that means that someone has messed with your preferences and will need to reinstall the default preferences in Photoshop. But these are all the default preferences for the shape tools in Photoshop CC. Now, what if I don't want to redraw that ellipse? What if I want to instead just make a duplicate of it? So just like we can duplicate other layers, we can duplicate shape layers. So if I take this ellipse, I make a duplicate of it with Command J, I can then change the color of that duplicate, right? And I can move it behind the other shape, and I can grow it. And I can warp it. And I can position it with either the move tool or even with the arrow keys and put it in place. Now it looks like it has an outline around it, and that's just because that shape layer is selected. As soon as I select off that shape layer, those lines will disappear. So they really are just like cutouts. I can also select the ellipse I just made, make a duplicate of it, and then flip it, since this is a very symmetrical design. Move it over. Move it underneath the other one. And so you'll get really used to manipulating layers this way. You want to work from your biggest